The blood on her mother's dress had dried to a rust-colored stain by the time Sarah Sullivan stopped coughing, and in that terrible silence, 17-year-old Sarah knew her life had just fractured into a before and an after. They were 3 days out from Ardmore, Oklahoma, their wagon broken beyond repair after hitting a gully hidden by prairie grass, and her mother's lung fever had turned deadly in the unforgiving heat of the territory summer of 1882. Sarah knelt beside the makeshift bedroll, her hands trembling as she held her mother's cooling fingers, unable to process that the woman who had sung her to sleep every night of her childhood would never sing again. "Promise me," her mother had whispered with her final breaths, gripping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me you will survive this. You will make it to Ardmore. You will not give up." The words had come out between labored gasps, each one seeming to cost her everything. "Your father is waiting. You find him. You live, Sarah. You live for both of us now." Sarah had promised through her tears, not understanding the full weight of what she was agreeing to. Now, as the Oklahoma sun climbed higher and the cicadas began their relentless song, she understood with perfect clarity that she was alone on the prairie with no horse, limited water, and only the vaguest notion of which direction would take her to safety. The wagon had a broken axle and one wheel completely shattered. Their horse had bolted during the accident, disappearing into the endless grassland. She had 3 canteens of water, some dried meat, a blanket, and her mother's body to bury. The ground was harder than she expected. Sarah dug with a small spade they had brought for making cook fires, and the earth resisted every thrust of the blade. Sweat poured down her back, soaking through her cotton dress despite the early hour. Her hands blistered within the first 30 minutes, then the blisters burst, leaving raw patches that stung with each movement. She did not stop. Her mother deserved better than to be left for the coyotes and vultures already circling overhead in lazy spirals. It took her until midday to dig a grave deep enough. She had no lumber for a coffin, so she wrapped her mother in their best quilt, the one with the star pattern that had taken 2 winters to complete. Sarah said what prayers she could remember, her voice cracking in the dry air, then filled in the grave with shaking arms. She marked the spot with stones arranged in a cross and carved her mother's name into a piece of the broken wagon wheel with her father's knife. Margaret Rose Sullivan, beloved mother and wife, 1843, 1882. Then Sarah gathered what supplies she could carry, fashioned a crude pack from a canvas bag, and began walking east toward where she believed Ardmore must be. The afternoon heat was murderous. The tall prairie grass whispered around her legs, and the horizon stretched endlessly in all directions, offering no landmark, no comfort, no hope of immediate rescue. She walked until the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. When darkness fell, Sarah made a cold camp, afraid to light a fire, without knowing if there were hostile parties nearby. The territory was still wild country, caught between its Indian past and its settler future, and a young woman alone was vulnerable to dangers she barely understood. She ate a small portion of dried beef, rationed her water carefully, and tried to sleep with her back against a small rise in the land. Every sound made her start awake, her heart pounding. Coyotes yipped in the distance. An owl hooted somewhere close by. The grass rustled with the movements of small creatures going about their nocturnal business. By the second day, Sarah's lips were cracked and bleeding. The sun was relentless, beating down on her bonnet until her head ached with the heat. She had finished 1 canteen and was trying to conserve the others, taking only small sips when her throat became too parched to swallow. Her feet throbbed in her boots, blisters forming on her heels and toes. She kept walking, putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering her mother's final moments, and that was a pain too large to hold while still maintaining the will to survive. On the 3rd day, she saw the dust cloud. At first, she thought it was a trick of the heat, a mirage born from desperation and dehydration. but the cloud grew larger, and eventually she could make out shapes within it. Riders, several of them moving at a steady pace across the prairie. Sarah's first instinct was to hide, to crouch down in the tall grass and let them pass, because riders could mean danger as easily as rescue. But her water was nearly gone, and she knew with grim certainty that she would not last another day without help. She stood in the open and waved her arms, her voice too hoarse to call out effectively. The riders altered their course, angling toward her. As they drew closer, Sarah could see they were cowboys. 4 men dressed in work clothes covered in trail dust, wide-brimmed hats pulled low against the sun. They rode good horses and wore their gun belts with the casual ease of men accustomed to the weight. The lead rider was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his bay gelding with the relaxed posture of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. The cowboys reined in about 10 feet from where Sarah stood, and she saw them take in her appearance with quick, assessing glances. She knew what they saw. A young woman alone, dress torn and dirty, face sunburned, swaying slightly on her feet from exhaustion and heat. The lead rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that held a directness Sarah found both intimidating and oddly reassuring. "Miss, are you hurt?" His voice was deep and carried a slight drawl that marked him as someone raised in the South. He kept his distance, his hands visible and away from his gun, clearly trying not to frighten her further. "Water!" Sarah managed to croak out. "Please, I have been walking for 3 days." The cowboy immediately unhooked a canteen from his saddle and brought it to her. "Slowly," he cautioned as she reached for it with desperate hands. "You will make yourself sick if you drink too fast." Sarah forced herself to take small sips, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp the water down. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. When the first frantic edge of her thirst was satisfied, she lowered the canteen and looked up at the man watching her with concerned eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I am Sarah Sullivan. I was traveling with my mother to Ardmore when our wagon broke. She died 3 days ago. I have been trying to reach town on foot." One of the other riders, a shorter man with a tobacco-stained beard, let out a low whistle. "3 days on foot in this heat? Girl, you are lucky to be alive." "Shut up, Pete," the lead cowboy said without heat, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "I am Wilson Quaid. These are my men. We are driving cattle to Ardmore for shipping east. You are welcome to ride with us. The town is about 15 miles northeast of here." 15 miles? Sarah felt her knees go weak. She had been walking in the wrong direction, angling too far south. If she had continued alone, she would have missed the town entirely and walked into even emptier country. Her promise to her mother would have died with her on the endless prairie. "I would be grateful for the assistance, Mr. Quaid," Sarah said, trying to maintain some dignity despite her desperate circumstances. Wilson turned to one of his men. "Tommy, ride back and bring up a wagon from the camp. Tell Cole to make sure there is water and food ready." He looked back at Sarah. "We have a chuck wagon following the herd. You can rest there while we finish the drive to Ardmore. Should reach town by tomorrow evening if we keep a good pace." "I do not want to be a burden," Sarah said, though in truth she was not sure she could walk another step. "You are not a burden. You are a person in need of help, and we have the means to provide it." Wilson's tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were kind. "Sit down in the shade of my horse, Miss Sullivan. Tommy will be back shortly." Sarah sank gratefully to the ground, leaning against a small boulder, while Wilson's bay gelding provided a strip of shadow. The other cowboys had dismounted and were passing around a canteen and talking in low voices. Wilson stayed close to Sarah, not hovering, but clearly keeping watch to make sure she was all right. After a few minutes, he produced a piece of hardtack from his saddlebag and offered it to her. "It is not much, but you should eat something." Sarah accepted the hardtack and gnawed on it slowly. It was tough and bland, but her stomach welcomed the substance. "You are very kind, Mr. Quaid. just doing what anyone decent would do. He squatted down on his heels beside her, his hat brim shading his face. I am sorry about your mother. That is a hard loss to bear alone. The sympathy in his voice made Sarah's throat tighten with suppressed tears. She had not allowed herself to properly grieve, had focused entirely on survival because that was what her mother had demanded. Now, in the presence of kindness, the wall she had built around her emotions threatened to crumble. She made me promise I would survive, Sarah said quietly, that I would make it to Ardmore and find my father. He went ahead 6 months ago to establish a claim and build a house. He was supposed to send for us, but when my mother became ill, she insisted we could not wait any longer. She wanted to see him again. Wilson nodded slowly. What is your father's name? Ardmore is not a large town. Someone will know where to find him. Patrick Sullivan. He filed for land about 10 miles west of town, according to his last letter. I will ask around when we arrive. We will get you to your father, Miss Sullivan. That is a promise. Sarah looked at this cowboy who had appeared out of the dust and heat, like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. There was something solid about him, something steady and reliable that made her believe his promises meant something. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. I could be anyone. Wilson's expression was serious. I was raised to believe that how you treat people when they are at their weakest says everything about your character. My mother would have my hide if I left a young woman alone on the prairie to die. Beyond that, it is simply the right thing to do. Before Sarah could respond, one of the other cowboys called out, Rider coming! That was quick. A wagon appeared over a rise in the land, driven by a young cowboy who looked barely 20. He pulled the mules to a stop and jumped down with the energy of youth. Boss said to bring the wagon. What do we got? Young woman who has been walking for 3 days after her wagon broke and her mother died, Wilson said, rising to his feet. We are taking her to Ardmore. Help me get her settled in the wagon. Wilson offered Sarah his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked for his living. He steadied her when she swayed, his other hand coming to rest lightly on her elbow. Easy now, one step at a time. They got Sarah settled in the back of the chuck wagon, which was fitted with a canvas cover that provided blessed shade. There were supplies stacked neatly along the sides, sacks of flour and beans, cooking implements, bedrolls. The cook, a grizzled older man with a salt and pepper beard, introduced himself as Dutch and immediately set about making Sarah a proper meal. Within minutes, she had a tin plate of beans and salt pork, along with fresh biscuits and strong coffee. Eat slow, Dutch advised. Your stomach will not be used to rich food after days of going without. Sarah ate carefully, savoring each bite. The food sat heavy but welcome in her belly. Dutch watched her with the practiced eye of someone used to caring for others, occasionally refilling her coffee cup without being asked. The wagon began to move, rolling across the prairie at a steady pace, and Sarah could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional shout of cowboys keeping the herd together. We are moving about 2,000 head, Dutch told her as he cleaned his cooking implements, taking them to the railhead in Ardmore for shipment to Kansas City. Mr. Quaid owns the ranch about 40 miles west of here. Good man to work for, fair and honest, which is more than you can say for most cattle barons these days. He seems very kind, Sarah said, thinking of the concern in Wilson's gray eyes. Dutch chuckled. He is that. Got a soft heart under all that leather and muscle. Lost his own mother 2 years back to cholera. Maybe that is why he was so quick to help you. Knows what it is to lose family too young. Sarah absorbed this information, feeling a kinship with Wilson Quaid that went beyond gratitude for rescue. They had both experienced profound loss. They both understood the weight of grief. She slept for several hours in the wagon, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. When she woke, the sun was lower in the sky, and the wagon had stopped. She could hear the sounds of camp being made, men talking, horses being tended, the clatter of pots and pans as Dutch prepared the evening meal. Sarah climbed carefully out of the wagon, her body stiff and sore, and found herself in the middle of a cattle camp. There were about 15 cowboys scattered around, some tending horses, others rolling out bedrolls or gathering wood for fires. The cattle were a dark mass in the distance, settled for the night, with a few riders circling them slowly to keep watch. It was a scene Sarah had read about in dime novels, but never experienced firsthand, and despite her exhaustion and grief, she felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement under different circumstances. Wilson appeared at her elbow, seeming to materialize out of the gathering dusk. "You slept well, I hope." "Better than I have in days." "Thank you again, Mr. Quaid." "Please call me Wilson. We are not formal people out here." He gestured toward a campfire where logs had been arranged as makeshift seats. "Come sit. Dutch will have supper ready soon." Sarah joined Wilson at the fire, grateful for the warmth as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. The other cowboys nodded respectfully to her but kept their distance, clearly understanding that she had been through an ordeal and needed space. Wilson sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the solid presence of him, but not so close as to be improper. "Tell me about your father," Wilson said. "What kind of man is he?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her father's booming laugh and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was happy. "He is a dreamer, always believed there was something better waiting just over the horizon. He worked as a blacksmith in Missouri, but he wanted land of his own, a place where he could build something lasting. When the territory opened for settlement, he saw his chance. He is a good man, a hard worker. My mother adored him. She must have to make that journey while ill just to see him again. She knew she was dying. The lung fever had taken hold, and no amount of medicine seemed to help. She said she would rather die trying to reach my father than die waiting in Missouri. I think she held on as long as she did through sheer force of will." Sarah's voice caught. "She held on until we were close, until she knew we were almost there." Wilson reached over and gave her hand a brief, comforting squeeze. The gesture was so natural, so unforced that Sarah did not think to be scandalized by the familiarity. "She held on until she knew you would be all right. A mother's love is like that. It gives strength beyond what seems possible." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and listening to the sounds of the camp settling in for the night. Dutch called out that supper was ready, and Sarah found herself eating a second good meal, this time beef stew with vegetables and more of Dutch's excellent biscuits. The cowboys ate with the efficiency of men who worked hard physically, but they were polite and minded their manners around Sarah, which she appreciated. After supper, one of the younger cowboys produced a harmonica and began to play, simple melodies that floated across the prairie like prayers. Another man sang in a surprisingly good tenor voice, songs about lost loves and distant homes. Sarah listened with her eyes closed, letting the music soothe some of the raw ache in her chest. When she opened her eyes, she found Wilson watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You should rest," he said quietly. "We will start early tomorrow to cover the last distance to Ardmore." "Where should I sleep?" "The wagon is yours for the night. Dutch will bunk with the men. I will make sure someone keeps watch nearby in case you need anything." Sarah wanted to protest that she did not need special treatment, but the truth was that she was grateful for the privacy and security. She thanked Wilson and retired to the wagon, where Dutch had laid out a clean bedroll for her. Despite the hardness of the wagon bed, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the harmonica music and the knowledge that she was no longer alone. The next day dawned clear and hot. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment she forgot where she was, expecting to see her mother tending a campfire. The rush of memory was like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She lay still for a moment, gathering herself, then climbed out of the wagon to face another day. The camp was already being broken down with practiced efficiency. Cowboys rolled bedrolls, loaded equipment, and saddled horses with the smooth coordination of men who had done these tasks 1,000 times before. Wilson was checking his horse's hooves, running his hand down each leg to check for heat or swelling. He looked up when Sarah approached and gave her a slight smile. "Morning. Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you. What can I do to help?" Wilson straightened, dusting his hands on his pants. "You are a guest. You do not need to do anything. I would rather be useful than sit idle." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Dutch could probably use help packing up the breakfast things. Fair warning, he is particular about how his kitchen is organized." Sarah found Dutch muttering over his Dutch oven, trying to scrape off some burned-on bits. She offered to help, and he handed her a rag and a bucket of water without argument. They worked together in silence for a few minutes before Dutch spoke. "You got grit, girl. Not many could walk 3 days in this heat and come out the other side still standing. My mother made me promise I would survive. I could not break that promise." "Good promises are what keep us human," Dutch said philosophically. "Bad promises are what make us fools. Sounds like your mama gave you the good kind." They finished cleaning up, and Sarah helped Dutch pack the cooking equipment back into the wagon with meticulous care. By the time they were done, the herd was already moving, a river of cattle flowing across the prairie, with cowboys riding the flanks to keep them bunched together. Wilson rode up, leading a gentle-looking sorrel mare. "Thought you might like to ride for a bit instead of bouncing around in the wagon," he said. "This is Rosie. She is about as calm as they come." Sarah had ridden some as a child, though never extensively. She accepted Wilson's help mounting, trying not to notice how easily his hands spanned her waist or how warm they felt even through the fabric of her dress. Once she was settled in the saddle, Wilson adjusted her stirrups with quick, efficient movements. "You remember how to handle the reins?" "I think so. It has been a while." "Rosie will mostly follow along with the other horses. If you get tired or uncomfortable, just let me know, and we will get you back to the wagon." Wilson mounted his own horse with easy grace. "Ready?" They rode side by side, keeping pace with the wagon and the slow-moving herd. The sun climbed steadily, but a breeze had picked up, making the heat more bearable than the previous days. Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, her body remembering skills she thought she had forgotten. Wilson rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of the cattle drive. "How long have you been ranching?" Sarah asked. "Since I was about 16. Started as a cowhand on someone else's ranch down in Texas. Saved my money, learned everything I could, and eventually bought some land of my own up here in the territory. Started with about 50 head of cattle and built from there. Now I run about 5,000 head year-round, employ 20 men, and ship cattle east 3 times a year." "That is impressive. You must have worked very hard." Wilson shrugged. "Hard work is all I know. My father died when I was young. My mother worked herself to the bone to keep us fed and clothed. When she got sick, I did not have the money for good doctors or medicine. By the time I had made something of myself, it was too late. She died thinking I was still just a cowhand scraping by." His jaw tightened. "I would give everything I have built for one more day with her." Sarah understood that feeling completely. "I am sure she was proud of you regardless. Mothers have a way of seeing the best in their children." "Maybe." Wilson glanced at her. "You will have your father at least. That is something to hold on to." They rode in silence for a while, and Sarah found herself studying Wilson when she thought he was not looking. He sat his horse with unconscious confidence, his body moving with the animal as if they were one entity. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and firm jaw, but there was something gentle in the way he spoke and moved that suggested a man who had known hardship and chosen kindness in response rather than bitterness. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma sun. Around midday, they stopped to rest the cattle and let them drink from a creek that cut across the prairie. Wilson helped Sarah down from the horse, his hands lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something flicker in Wilson's gaze before he stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "You did well," he said. "You have a good seat. Rosie likes you. She is a sweet horse." Sarah patted the mare's neck. "Thank you for letting me ride her." "Any time." They ate a quick lunch of jerky and hardtack, then remounted to cover the remaining miles to Ardmore. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to see signs of civilization: fences marking property lines, plowed fields, a distant farmhouse with smoke rising from its chimney. Her heart began to beat faster. She was almost there. She was almost to the place her mother had fought so hard to reach. Ardmore appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning its descent toward evening. It was not a large town, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, but to Sarah, it looked like paradise. Wilson rode close beside her as they approached, the cattle herd spreading out now that they were near their destination. "The stockyards are on the east side of town," Wilson said. "I need to get the cattle pinned and deal with the buyer. Would you like to come with me? Or would you rather I take you to the hotel first?" "I should try to find my father," Sarah said, though the thought of being alone again filled her with unexpected anxiety. Over the past day and a half, she had grown accustomed to Wilson's steady presence. Wilson nodded. "Let me get you settled at the hotel, then I will ask around about your father's claim. Someone will know where to find him." The Ardmore Hotel was a two-story structure with a wide front porch and lace curtains in the windows. Wilson dismounted and helped Sarah down, then escorted her inside with a proprietary hand on her lower back. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Need a room for the lady," Wilson said. "Best you have available. Put it on my account." "Mr. Quaid, I cannot let you pay for my accommodation," Sarah protested. "You can, and you will. Consider it the neighborly thing to do." Wilson's tone was gentle but firm. "You have been through hell, Miss Sullivan. Let me help." The clerk produced a key. "Room 6, top of the stairs and to the left. Will the lady be needing anything else?" "A bath, if possible," Sarah said. She could not remember the last time she had been properly clean. "I will have water sent up right away, miss." Wilson carried Sarah's meager bundle of possessions up the stairs and opened the door to room 6. It was simple but clean, with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the main street. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple luxury of 4 walls and a real bed. "I will leave you to rest and clean up," Wilson said. "I will be back in a couple of hours with news about your father." "Wilson," Sarah caught his hand before he could leave. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "You saved your own life, Sarah. You walked for 3 days in killing heat because you made a promise. That is not something most people could do. I just pointed you in the right direction. It was more than that, and you know it." Wilson's expression softened. "Get some rest. We will find your father, and you will be safe. That is all that matters." After he left, Sarah stood in the middle of the room, feeling the strange emptiness of being alone again after the bustle of the cattle camp. A knock at the door announced the arrival of 2 hotel employees carrying a large tin tub and buckets of hot water. They filled the tub, provided soap and towels, and left Sarah to her bath. The hot water was heaven. Sarah sank into the tub with a sigh, feeling days of dirt and sweat and grief soak away. She washed her hair, scrubbed her skin until it glowed pink, and finally just sat in the cooling water, trying to process everything that had happened. Her mother was dead. She was in Ardmore. She would soon see her father. And there was a cowboy downstairs who made her heart beat faster every time he looked at her with those steady gray eyes. Sarah climbed out of the tub and dried herself with the rough towels, then realized with dismay that she had nothing clean to wear. Her one dress was filthy and torn, hardly suitable for a reunion with her father. A knock at the door interrupted her worry. "Miss Sullivan?" It was the hotel clerk. "I have a package for you from Mr. Quaid." Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket and cracked the door open. The clerk handed her a brown paper parcel, averting his eyes politely. Inside, Sarah found a simple but pretty day dress in blue cotton, along with fresh undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of new boots. There was a note in Wilson's firm handwriting. "Thought you might need these. The mercantile owner's wife guessed at your size. Hope they fit. WQ." Sarah held the dress to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. Wilson Quaid barely knew her, yet he had anticipated her needs and provided for them without being asked. She dressed quickly, and while the fit was not perfect, it was close enough. The dress was modest and practical, exactly what a respectable young woman would wear. Sarah brushed out her wet hair, plaited it into a simple braid, and felt human again for the first time since her mother's death. She was sitting by the window, watching the street when Wilson returned. The knock at her door made her jump up nervously. When she opened it, Wilson stood in the hallway with his hat in his hands. He had cleaned up too, his face freshly shaved and his dark hair damp from washing. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "The dress fits well," he said. "Blue suits you." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for your generosity. I do not know how I will repay you. I do not want repayment, I want to help." Wilson shifted his weight. "I have news about your father." Sarah's heart leaped. "You found him?" "Yes and no. I found out where his claim is, about 12 miles west of here near Spring Creek, but apparently he is not there right now. One of the men at the stockyard said Patrick Sullivan rode into town about 3 days ago looking for you and your mother. Someone had sent word that a wagon was spotted broken down on the prairie. Your father has been searching for you. He is out there looking for me." Sarah felt faint. He could be anywhere. "We will find him," Wilson said firmly. "I sent word to the claim that you are here and safe. If he returns there, he will know to come to town. I also left messages at the sheriff's office and the church. Someone will get word to him. In the meantime, you should eat and rest. You have done enough." But Sarah could not rest, not knowing her father was somewhere out on the prairie searching for her, probably imagining the worst. She paced her hotel room until Wilson suggested they get supper at the town's restaurant. Sarah agreed, grateful for any distraction. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. Wilson ordered for both of them: steak, potatoes, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. Sarah discovered she was ravenous, and she ate with good appetite while Wilson told her about his ranch and his plans for expanding his operation. "I want to improve the bloodlines," he said, cutting into his steak. "Bring in some quality breeding stock from back east. The better the cattle, the better the price they bring. But it takes capital, and I have had to reinvest everything back into the operation." "It sounds like you have a good business mind." "I have made my share of mistakes. Lost a whole herd one winter when a blizzard hit before I could get them to shelter. That set me back 2 years. But you learn from the failures as much as the successes." Sarah found herself fascinated by the details of ranching life. Wilson spoke with passion about the land and the animals, painting a picture of a hard but rewarding life. She could see why he had chosen this path, why he had built something from nothing through sheer determination. They were finishing their pie when the restaurant door burst open and a man stumbled in, wild-eyed and covered in trail dust. Sarah recognized him instantly despite the haggard appearance. "Papa!" She was out of her chair and running before she consciously decided to move. Patrick Sullivan caught his daughter in his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He was crying, great shuddering sobs that shook his whole frame. "Sarah, Sarah, thank God. I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost both of you. I am here, Papa. I am safe." It was several minutes before either of them could speak coherently. Wilson had quietly paid for the meal, and was standing a respectful distance away, giving them privacy. Finally, Patrick pulled back and held Sarah at arm's length, studying her face as if to convince himself she was real. "Where is your mother? Please tell me she is at the hotel, that she is just tired from the journey." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "Papa, I am so sorry. Mama died 4 days ago. The lung fever took her. We were still on the prairie when it happened. I buried her as best I could and tried to walk to Ardmore. If Mr. Quaid had not found me, I would not have made it." Patrick's face crumpled. He looked suddenly old, every one of his 42 years showing in the lines around his eyes and mouth. "She is gone? Margaret is truly gone? She held on as long as she could. She wanted to see you so badly, Papa. She loved you so much." Father and daughter clung to each other, grieving together. Wilson moved quietly to the door, clearly intending to give them space, but Sarah called out to him, "Wilson, please do not go. I want my father to meet you properly." Wilson returned, and Sarah made the introductions. Patrick Sullivan shook Wilson's hand with both of his grip fierce with gratitude. "Mr. Quaid, my daughter tells me you saved her life. How can I ever thank you?" "No thanks needed, sir. I am just glad we found her when we did." Patrick insisted on hearing the whole story, so they sat back down at the table, and Sarah recounted everything that had happened since the wagon broke. Patrick listened with his hands clenched into fists on the table, his jaw working with emotion. When Sarah reached the part about her promise to her mother, Patrick reached over and squeezed her hand. "Your mother knew you were strong enough to survive. She always said you had iron in your spine." He turned to Wilson. "And you, Mr. Quaid, you have given me back my daughter. If there is ever anything I can do to repay that debt, you need only ask." "I will keep that in mind, Mr. Sullivan." They talked long into the evening, Patrick sharing news of his claim and the house he had been building. He had filed for a quarter section of land near good water, with timber for building and rich soil for crops. The house was not finished yet, but the basic structure was sound, and he had been working on it every day, dreaming of the moment when he could bring his wife and daughter to their new home. "Now it will just be the two of us," Patrick said heavily. "The house will feel empty without Margaret's laughter filling it." "We will make it a home anyway, Papa," Sarah said. "That is what Mama would want. She wanted us to build a life here." Patrick nodded, scrubbing at his eyes. "You are right. We will honor her memory by living well." He looked at Wilson. "Will you come visit the claim, Mr. Quaid? I would like to show you what we are building, and Sarah should see her new home." "I would be honored," Wilson said. They made plans to ride out to the claim in 2 days, giving Patrick time to make the place more presentable for Sarah's arrival. Wilson saw them both back to the hotel, securing a room for Patrick next to Sarah's. At Sarah's door, Wilson paused, his hat in his hands again, a gesture Sarah was coming to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "I am glad you found your father," he said quietly. "You kept your promise to your mother. I could not have done it without you." Sarah looked up at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "If you would like. I need to settle up with the cattle buyer and make arrangements for my men to head back to the ranch, but I could call on you in the afternoon if that is agreeable." "Very agreeable." Wilson smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "Then I will see you tomorrow, Miss Sullivan." "Sarah, please call me Sarah." "Sarah." He said her name like it was something precious. "Sleep well." After he left, Sarah stood in her doorway for a long moment, her hand pressed to her heart. She had known Wilson Quaid for less than 2 days, yet already she could not imagine her life without him in it. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning, Sarah had breakfast with her father in the hotel dining room. Patrick looked better after a night's rest and a good meal, though grief still shadowed his eyes. They talked about Margaret, sharing memories and stories, laughing and crying by turns. It was a catharsis they both needed. Your mother would have liked Mr. Quaid, Patrick said as they finished their coffee. She always had a soft spot for men who did the right thing without expecting reward. Papa, I have only just met him. Do not start planning a wedding. I am not planning anything. I am just observing that you smile differently when you talk about him. Patrick reached across the table and patted her hand. You are 18 years old, Sarah, old enough to know your own heart. I just want you to be happy. Sarah was saved from responding by Wilson's arrival. He had cleaned up even more, wearing a pressed shirt and vest, his boots polished. He greeted them both with easy courtesy and suggested they take a walk around town so Sarah could see what Ardmore had to offer. The town was busier than Sarah had expected, with wagons rolling down the main street and people going about their business. Wilson pointed out the various establishments: the general store, the post office, the church, the schoolhouse, the saloons. There was a bank being constructed on the corner, the framework of the building skeleton-like against the sky. Ardmore is growing, Wilson said. The railroad came through 2 years ago, and that changed everything. Before, this was just a wide spot in the trail. Now, we have legitimate commerce, regular mail service, even a newspaper. They stopped at the general store so Sarah could purchase some basic necessities she would need at her father's claim. Wilson offered to pay, but Sarah insisted on using some of the small amount of money her mother had sewn into the hem of her skirt for emergencies. The storekeeper, a jolly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was delighted to meet Patrick Sullivan's daughter and offered endless advice on what Sarah would need to set up housekeeping. As they left the store laden with packages, Sarah realized she was enjoying herself. The grief over her mother was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but it was possible to feel happiness alongside the sorrow. Wilson made it easy to laugh, pointing out amusing sights and telling stories about various townspeople in a gentle, affectionate way that showed his fondness for the community. They had lunch at the restaurant again, and this time Wilson told Sarah about his own family history. His father had been a farmer in Tennessee who died when Wilson was 8, leaving his mother to raise 4 children alone. Wilson, as the eldest, had worked from a young age to help support the family. His siblings were scattered now: a brother in California, a sister married to a shopkeeper in St. Louis, another sister who had died of scarlet fever at age 12. Do you ever get lonely? Sarah asked. Running a ranch by yourself? No family close by? Sometimes, Wilson admitted. I have good men working for me, and Dutch is like a father in his way. But there are nights when the house feels too big and too quiet. He looked at her with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch. I would like a family of my own someday. A wife, children, people to build something for. What kind of woman would you want as a wife? Sarah could not believe her own boldness in asking. Wilson was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Someone strong, someone who understands that life out here is hard but beautiful. Someone who would be a true partner, not just a decoration. He paused. Someone who keeps her promises. The air between them felt charged, electric. Sarah knew they were talking about more than hypotheticals. She opened her mouth to respond, but the arrival of their food interrupted the moment. They ate in a silence that was both comfortable and filled with unspoken possibility. That afternoon, Wilson had business at the stockyards, and Sarah returned to the hotel to help her father plan what they would need for the claim. Patrick had lists upon lists, organized in his methodical way, and Sarah threw herself into the practical work of planning a household. It kept her mind occupied and gave her a sense of purpose beyond grief. Wilson came by the hotel that evening and asked if Sarah would like to take a walk. Patrick waved them off with a knowing smile that made Sarah blush. They walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange by the setting sun. I spoke with the cattle buyer today, Wilson said. Got a good price for the herd. I will have enough to make some improvements to the ranch and still put some money aside. I am happy for you. I was thinking... Wilson stopped walking and turned to face her. Your father's claim is only about 8 miles from my ranch. We would be neighbors, in a manner of speaking. I suppose we would be. So I could call on you, if you would like. Properly, I mean. Court you. Sarah's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. We have only known each other 3 days, Wilson. I know. It is too soon to be feeling what I am feeling. But I cannot help it, Sarah. From the moment I saw you standing alone on that prairie, looking half dead but refusing to give up, I felt something I have never felt before. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You are beautiful and brave and true. I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you would give me a chance to prove I could make you happy. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. This good, solid man who had saved her life now stood before her offering his heart. She thought of her mother's dying words, the promise to survive and live. She thought of the long walk across the prairie when she had been sure she would die. She thought of the moment Wilson had appeared out of the dust like a miracle. I am feeling it too, she whispered. This pull towards you. It frightens me a little. We can go slow. I will not rush you. But I need to know if you feel there could be something between us. Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble against her palm. Yes, she said. I feel it. There could definitely be something between us. Wilson closed his eyes briefly, as if in relief or prayer. When he opened them again, they were blazing with emotion. May I kiss you, Sarah? Yes. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His lips touched hers softly, tentatively, a question more than a demand. Sarah leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms, as rapid as her own. The kiss deepened, though still gentle, filled with promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Wilson rested his forehead against hers. I am going to court you properly, Sarah Sullivan, with flowers and picnics and all the things a woman deserves. And when you are ready, when you know your own heart completely, I am going to ask your father for permission to marry you. You are very sure of yourself. I am sure of us. The rest will work itself out. They walked back to town hand in hand, and Sarah felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she had not expected to find so soon after her mother's death. It felt like a betrayal at first, this happiness budding alongside grief, but then she remembered her mother's words. Live, Sarah. Live for both of us now. This was living. This was embracing the future instead of hiding from it. 2 days later, true to his word, Wilson arrived at the hotel with a wagon to take Sarah and Patrick out to the claim. The day was clear and beautiful, with a breeze that kept the heat manageable. They drove west out of Ardmore, following a wagon road that cut through prairie and patches of scrubland. Wilson pointed out landmarks and explained the layout of the land claims in the area. My ranch starts about 2 miles past your father's place, he said. 5,000 acres running from Spring Creek north to the Ridge Country. Good grazing land, plenty of water. Patrick's claim was indeed situated beautifully, near a creek lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. The house was a simple structure, still unfinished, but the bones were good. Patrick had built it using timber from his own land, and the craftsmanship showed his skill as a former blacksmith. There were 2 rooms completed with a fireplace and a loft for sleeping. Another room was framed but not yet sided or roofed. I was going to finish that as a bedroom for you and your mother, Patrick said, his voice thick with emotion. Now I suppose it can be just for you, or we can turn it into something else. Sarah walked through the house, touching the wooden walls her father had built with his own hands. She could see the love in every plank, the care in every joint. Outside, there was a well already dug, a small barn for animals, and land cleared for planting. It was the beginning of a real homestead. It is wonderful, Papa, she said, hugging him tight. Mama would have loved it. They spent the afternoon making plans for finishing the house and setting up the property. Wilson offered to send some of his men to help with the heavier work, and Patrick accepted gratefully. By the time the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, Sarah could envision what the place would look like when it was finished. A real home, solid and permanent. Before they left, Wilson asked if he could show Sarah his ranch. Patrick agreed with a knowing smile, and Wilson helped Sarah back into the wagon. They drove the 2 miles to Wilson's property, and Sarah's breath caught when she saw the ranch house. It was much larger than her father's cabin, a sprawling 2-story structure built of native stone and timber. There was a wide front porch with rocking chairs, multiple outbuildings including a large barn and bunkhouse, and corrals that held dozens of horses. The setting sun painted everything golden, and Sarah could see why Wilson loved this place. "I built it myself mostly," Wilson said, helping her down from the wagon. "Well, me and my men. Took 2 years to get it to this point, and I am still not done. I keep thinking about additions, improvements." He showed her around the property, pointing out the different areas and explaining his operation. Sarah was impressed by the scale of it, the careful organization and planning that went into running a successful ranch. When they reached the house, Wilson hesitated before opening the door. "It is not fancy," he warned. "I am not home enough to worry much about decoration." The inside of the house was indeed utilitarian, with sturdy furniture and few personal touches. But it was clean and well built, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a massive stone fireplace that would keep the place warm in winter. Sarah could see the potential in it, the way it could be transformed into a real home with the right touches. "It is a good house," she said. "Solid. Built to last. I built it for a family," Wilson said quietly. "I just have not had the family yet to put in it." They stood in the main room, the air between them charged with possibility. Sarah knew what he was asking without words. This could be her home if she chose. This could be her future. "Show me the rest," she said. Wilson took her upstairs where there were 3 bedrooms, all sparsely furnished. The master bedroom had a large bed with a simple quilt, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the ranch. Sarah stood at that window, imagining waking up to this view every morning, and the thought did not frighten her as much as it should have. They had supper with Dutch and some of the ranch hands in the bunkhouse, a rowdy meal full of laughter and good-natured teasing. The men clearly respected Wilson, and they treated Sarah with old-fashioned courtesy that she appreciated. After the meal, Wilson walked her outside to watch the stars come out. "I know it is too soon," he said, taking her hands in his. "I know you need time to grieve and adjust and find your footing. But I want you to know that I am serious about my intentions, Sarah. When you are ready, I will be here, for as long as it takes. You are a good man, Wilson Quaid. I am a man who knows what he wants. I want you. I want to build a life with you. I want to honor your mother's memory by making sure you not only survive, but thrive." Sarah kissed him, pouring everything she could not yet say into the gesture. Wilson held her gently, as if she were something precious. When they pulled apart, Sarah made her decision. "Court me properly," she said. "Come calling at my father's place. Let me get settled into this new life. But know that I am already halfway to loving you, Wilson Quaid. You saved me in more ways than one." The next few weeks established a pattern. Sarah and Patrick worked on finishing the house and setting up their homestead. Wilson came calling 3 times a week, bringing flowers picked from the prairie, fresh meat from his ranch, once even a book of poetry he had ordered from back east. They would sit on the porch Patrick had built and talk for hours, or Wilson would help with heavy work around the claim, never asking for anything in return. Sarah found herself falling deeper in love with each visit. Wilson was everything she had not known she wanted: steady, kind, hardworking, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh even on days when grief threatened to overwhelm her. He understood her need to mourn her mother, while also building toward the future. He never pushed, never demanded, but made his feelings clear through consistent action. Patrick watched the courtship with approval, often making himself scarce when Wilson visited to give them privacy. "He is a good man," Patrick told Sarah one evening. "Your mother would have liked him very much. She always said you needed someone strong enough to match your spirit." On a warm evening in late September, Wilson arrived at the Sullivan claim with a nervous energy Sarah had not seen before. They sat on the porch as usual, but Wilson seemed distracted, constantly fidgeting with his hat. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked. "No, nothing is wrong. I just have something I need to say, and I am not sure how to start." Sarah waited, her heart beginning to beat faster. Wilson took a deep breath and slid off his chair to kneel on one knee in front of her. "Sarah Sullivan, I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know it is fast by most standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are the woman I want to spend the rest of my days with. You are strong and brave and beautiful and everything I never knew I was looking for. I love you, Sarah. Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. She thought of her mother's last words, the promise to survive. She thought of the long walk across the prairie and the cowboy who had appeared when she needed him most. She thought of the future stretching ahead, full of possibility. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Wilson surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion he had kept carefully controlled until now. Sarah kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope into the embrace. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Wilson produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of value she owned. I want you to have it." Sarah let him slide the ring onto her finger, overwhelmed by the significance of the gesture. "I will treasure it." Patrick appeared on the porch, grinning widely. "I heard shouting. Should I assume there is news?" "I asked Sarah to marry me, and she said yes," Wilson said, shaking Patrick's hand. "I should have asked your permission first. I apologize for the breach in propriety." "Son, you have had my blessing since the day you brought my daughter back to me alive. When do you want to do this?" They decided on a November wedding, giving Sarah time to prepare and for the ranch work to slow down for the winter. The next 2 months passed in a blur of activity. Sarah sewed her wedding dress with help from women in Ardmore who had befriended her. Wilson finished the addition to Sarah's father's house so Patrick would have a comfortable place even after Sarah moved to the ranch. They made plans for the future, dreams spoken aloud in the darkness of the porch or while riding together across the prairie. The wedding took place on a crisp November day in the small church in Ardmore. Sarah wore her mother's locket, along with her new dress, feeling her mother's presence in the gesture. Patrick walked her down the aisle, with tears in his eyes, and Wilson waited at the altar, looking more handsome than Sarah had ever seen him in a new suit, ordered special from Kansas City. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Sarah spoke her vows with a clear, strong voice, promising to love and honor Wilson for all their days. Wilson's voice shook slightly as he made the same promises, sliding a matching gold band onto Sarah's finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wilson kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah felt the last piece of her shattered heart click back into place. The reception was held at Wilson's ranch, with food and drink provided for everyone in town. Cowboys and farmers mingled, children ran around shrieking with laughter, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Wilson danced with Sarah under the stars, holding her close and whispering promises in her ear. "I am going to make you so happy," he said. "I am going to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," Sarah replied. "You helped me keep my promise to my mother. You gave me a reason to keep living. Everything else is just blessing on top of blessing." They spent their wedding night in the ranch house that was now Sarah's home. Wilson carried her over the threshold with ceremony, then set her down gently in the main room. Sarah looked around at the house, seeing it with new eyes. This was her home now. This was where she would build her life. Wilson took her upstairs to the bedroom, and Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. But Wilson was patient and gentle, treating her like something precious. He loved her with reverence and passion, and Sarah discovered that physical intimacy could be beautiful when shared with someone you truly loved. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah dreamed of her mother, smiling down on her with approval. The first year of marriage was not without challenges. Sarah had to learn to run a large household, to coordinate meals for ranch hands, and manage supplies for a working ranch. There were times she felt overwhelmed, when the grief for her mother would hit her in unexpected waves. But Wilson was always there, steady and patient, helping her find her footing. Sarah transformed the ranch house into a real home, adding curtains and cushions and small touches that made the space feel warm and lived in. She planted a garden in the spring, vegetables and flowers that reminded her of her mother's garden back in Missouri. She learned to ride well enough to accompany Wilson on his rounds of the ranch, and she came to love the vast Oklahoma landscape with its endless skies and rolling grassland. Patrick became a regular visitor, often staying for weeks at a time. He and Wilson formed a close friendship, and Patrick helped with various projects around the ranch. Sarah loved seeing her father happy and healthy, knowing that her mother's dream of a better life in the territory had come true even if she had not lived to see it fully realized. In the spring of 1884, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Wilson one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the joy on his face made her heart swell. He placed his hand gently on her still flat belly and looked at her with such love that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Sarah. Everything I never dared to hope for. The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from sickness in the early months and exhaustion toward the end. But Wilson was attentive, hiring additional help for the house so Sarah could rest, bringing her special treats from town, reading to her in the evenings from books he ordered through the mail. Patrick moved into the ranch house for the last month of the pregnancy, wanting to be close in case Sarah needed him. Their son was born on a cold December night, a healthy baby with a strong cry and a shock of dark hair like his father's. They named him William Patrick Quaid, honoring Wilson's late father and Sarah's beloved parent. Sarah held her son and felt the circle of life completing itself. Her mother had died so Sarah could live, and now Sarah had brought new life into the world. Wilson was a devoted father from the moment William was placed in his arms. He would walk the floor with the baby at night so Sarah could sleep, would sing to him in his deep voice, would stare at his tiny face with an expression of wonder that never seemed to fade. Sarah fell even more in love with her husband watching him with their son. The years that followed were full and good. They had two more children, a daughter named Margaret Rose, after Sarah's mother, born in 1886, and another son named Henry, who arrived in 1888. The ranch prospered under Wilson's careful management, and they built a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Patrick became a fixture in the household, doting on his grandchildren and helping Wilson with the business side of ranching. Sarah occasionally thought about those terrible days on the prairie when she had been alone and afraid and certain she would die. She thought about her mother's last words, the promise that had kept her walking even when every step was agony. And she thought about the cowboy who had appeared out of the dust like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. On a warm evening in the summer of 1891, Sarah and Wilson sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. William was 6 now, running around with his younger siblings in tow. Margaret had her grandmother's red hair and her father's gray eyes. Henry was quiet and thoughtful, preferring to sit and observe rather than join in the roughhousing. "Do you ever regret it?" Wilson asked, reaching over to take Sarah's hand. "Marrying so quickly? Not taking more time to know me before committing your life to mine?" Sarah squeezed his hand, looking at this man who had become her whole world. "Not for a single moment. You helped me keep my promise to my mother. You helped me survive. And then you gave me reasons to do more than just survive. You gave me a life worth living, Wilson. You gave me everything." Wilson raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I am the one who got everything, Sarah. You took a broken down cowboy with a big empty house and turned him into a husband and a father. You made me whole. They sat together as the sun set, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children's laughter floating on the evening breeze. Sarah thought of her mother and whispered a silent thank you for the gift of life, for the strength to keep walking, for the promise that had led her to this moment. She had survived, just as her mother had demanded. But more than that, she had truly lived. And she would continue to live, to love, to build something beautiful on the foundation of loss and grief and hard-won joy. The ranch continued to thrive over the next decade. Wilson expanded his operations, eventually running nearly 8,000 head of cattle on land that stretched for miles. He hired more men, built additional outbuildings, and modernized his methods while still maintaining the hands-on approach that had made him successful. Sarah was his partner in every sense, managing the household accounts, coordinating the social aspects of ranching life, and raising their children with a firm but loving hand. Patrick lived to see his grandchildren grow, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1895 at the age of 55. They buried him on a hill overlooking the original claim he had filed, and Sarah made sure to visit his grave regularly, often bringing the children to tell them stories about their grandfather and the grandmother they had never known. She planted roses on both graves, hardy varieties that could withstand the Oklahoma climate, and they bloomed faithfully every summer. As the children grew, Sarah made sure they understood the story of how their parents had met. She told them about their grandmother Margaret, about the promise Sarah had made, about the long walk across the prairie, and the cowboy who had saved her life. She wanted them to understand that good things often came from hardship, that love could grow even in the hardest circumstances, that kindness to strangers was never wasted. William grew into a young man very much like his father, steady, hard-working, with a natural talent for ranching. He took over more and more of the daily operations as Wilson grew older, though Wilson never fully retired. Margaret married a schoolteacher from Ardmore and moved into town, but she visited the ranch frequently with her own children. Henry surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, studying back east before returning to Ardmore to set up a practice. He said he had been inspired by stories of his grandmother's death from lung fever and wanted to help prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, Wilson surprised Sarah with a trip to Missouri to visit the town where she had been born. They traveled by train, a luxury that still amazed Sarah, even though rail travel was commonplace now. They visited her childhood home, walked the streets of her memory, and stood at the graves of relatives who had passed. It was a bittersweet journey, but healing in its way. On the train ride back to Oklahoma, Wilson took Sarah's hand and looked at her with the same intensity he had shown on the prairie so many years before. "I have loved you every day since I first saw you standing in that grassland, refusing to quit. I will love you every day until I take my last breath. You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Sarah quaid. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the landscape roll by through the train window. "You kept my mother's last wish for me. You made sure I did not just survive, but that I lived fully and completely." "How do you thank someone for that?" "You do not need to thank me. You gave me everything in return. A home, a family, a purpose. We saved each other, Sarah." They returned to the ranch to find their children and grandchildren waiting to celebrate with them. The house was full of laughter and love, exactly what Sarah had always dreamed of during those dark days after her mother's death. She looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had kept her promise. She had survived. And in surviving, she had found a love that had sustained her through 25 years and would continue to sustain her for whatever time remained. Wilson and Sarah grew old together on the ranch they had built. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated weddings and births, mourned losses, and maintained the legacy of hard work and honest dealing that had always been their hallmark. The ranch became one of the most respected operations in Oklahoma, known for quality cattle and for the couple who ran it with integrity and compassion. On a spring evening in 1920, when Sarah was 56 years old and Wilson was 63, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Wilson's hair was white now, and Sarah's had threads of silver running through the auburn, but their hands still fit together perfectly. Their hearts still beat in sync. "Do you remember that first kiss?" Wilson asked, his voice still strong despite the years. "Out by the edge of town, with the sunset painting everything gold?" "I remember everything about our beginning," Sarah said. "Every word, every look, every moment. You were my miracle, Wilson. You were mine." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A horse whinnied in the barn. Their youngest grandchild called out something that made the others laugh. It was the sound of a life well lived, of promises kept, of love given and received in full measure. Sarah thought about the scared, grieving girl she had been, walking across the prairie with nothing but a promise to her dying mother keeping her feet moving. She thought about the cowboy who had appeared when she needed him most, who had seen past her desperate appearance to the strength underneath. She thought about the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Wilson stood and offered Sarah his hand, pulling her gently to her feet. They walked into their house together, the home they had filled with love and laughter, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had kept her promise to her mother in every way possible. She had not just survived, she had lived fully, loved deeply, and created something beautiful and lasting. And she had done it all with a man who had helped her keep that promise, the cowboy who had become her everything,